Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Shannon and I am from the Abrams Planetarium, and I'm very excited to bring you this first virtual planetarium show for the Grand Ledge Area District Libraries. Now I know the summer theme this year is myths and legends, and what better place to look for that than the night sky. So we are going to be doing just that, and we'll be using a software called Stellarium. And this is a free software and it works on most operating systems that you can download from stellarium.org. It also has a web version with a fewer less of the bells and whistles, but you can go check that out at stellarium.org. But let's head to our night sky. So here we are, I'm up in the corner, hello, and we've got our night sky. We're going to start by facing north on August 10th around 8:48 p.m., so almost 9 o'clock right when the sun is setting. Now, before we start, you might be wondering, why do we have cacti up here if we live in Michigan? We do not have any cacti. Well, the Abrams Planetarium creates a sky calendar with monthly views of the night sky and what's going to be up, and it's $12 per year, and you can go ahead and subscribe at abramsplanetarium.org/sky calendar. But you can see it's the same panorama here that we use in the sky calendar that we imported into Stellarium. And since this works for anywhere in the northern hemisphere, we've got cacti in the north. So here we go. Let's go ahead and get started. So here is the night sky again, just as the sun is setting on August 10th. Let's go ahead and speed time up just a little bit so we can let that sun set and those stars come up. So as we speed time up, we can see the stars come out. Now there is a rather well-known constellation that we can see in the north. It's actually a shape that we see. There are 88 official constellations that the International Astronomical Union uses. And anything that's outside of that is technically an asterism, though we really use the two terms interchangeably quite a bit. And so here is the Big Dipper, which is an asterism. 3 stars in the handle and 4 stars in the bowl right here. So that is our Big Dipper. Now this is a fairly well-known shape, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and turn on just that constellation. And we'll see that there's actually a lot more to it than just those 7 stars. And this is called Ursa Major, which is Latin for the Great Bear. So here's the handle of the Big Dipper is the tail of the bear. Here's the body, his nose, her nose I should say, front legs and back legs. Now she's got quite a long tail here, and we're going to come back to that in a moment with one of our very first myths and legends. So these outer 2 stars of the Big Dipper, if we draw a line through them and keep going, we find this star here, which is Polaris, which means the pole star. And just like our North Pole of the Earth is our axis of rotation, our North Pole points at the North Star. And so it appears to be the axis of rotation for the stars. So it stays put here. And let's go ahead and speed time up. We'll go around for a whole day. And we'll turn off our atmosphere so we keep our stars up even during the day. We see that the North Star stays put here. We'll do that one more time. Maybe a little slower. The North Star stays put while all the other stars make circular paths around it. And that's important for some of the stories that we might tell with what's up in the night sky. What you can see with a lot of the stories, the myths, the legends, the lore that comes along with the night sky is it's tied directly to the observations of the night sky. So they're not just stories, they're often tied to how we might tell time or tell what time of year it is. They're tied to observations of how the stars are what we call circumpolar. They're up every night of the year for certain locations as they go around in these large circular paths around our very still North Star, and so on. So you can see the science built into these stories as we go through. So I'm going to go ahead and stop time and take us back to August 10th at about 8:48 p.m. So right where we were, and bring on our atmosphere. Oh, we're going to go to about 9:48. There we go. All right. So let's go back here. We have our North Star, and once we find it, we find that it's the end of the handle of our Little Dipper. Now, the Little Dipper is very faint. It's hard to see. Generally, in most cities, we'll see Polaris and these outer two stars. We won't really see much of the others. So if you can get outside the city to go check out some stars, you're going to have a much more full sky of what you'd be able to see. But there's still plenty to see in the city if you can't get outside the city. So here, the Little Dipper always pours into the Big Dipper if you ever have trouble finding it. Now you see it's also called Ursa Minor, or the Little Bear. So let's bring on the art for our very first story. There we go. You see this one, especially the little bear, looks kind of like a dog because of that long tail. Now there's different versions of the stories from ancient Greece, but one version is that this was a beautiful woman named Callisto, and the god Zeus fell in love with her. He kind of falls in love with everyone, but that's besides the point. So he fell in love with her, and his wife Hera was very upset by this. So in one version, Zeus turns Callisto into a bear to protect her from Hera. Another version, Hera turns her into a bear out of jealousy. Either way, Callisto gets turned into a bear. She was out in the forest doing whatever bears do, and a hunter was about to shoot her with a bow and arrow. And that hunter happened to be her son Arcus. Now, Zeus saw what was about to happen. So to protect her, he grabbed her real quick by her short, stubby bear tail, swung her around his head, and threw her up into the sky. And when he did that, her tail got stretched out. Now, he didn't want her to be lonely, so he turned Arcus, her son, into a bear and did the same thing. So this is Callisto and Arcus up in our sky together with their very long tails. So that explains why space bears have long tails. Now, if we look at the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper in particular, these are very recognizable shapes. And the 88 official constellations we have are just one way of looking at the sky. Every culture around the world has looked at the same set of stars, the same sky. It's something that joins us all together. But everyone's interpreted that sky differently, according to what's important to them, according to what sort of timekeeping or navigation needs they had. And so because of that, we see different interpretations, and it's always an opportunity for us to learn from one another. And that's one thing that's really wonderful about Stellarium as well, is we're not limited to just the 88 official constellations from the IAU, but we can go in and learn from different cultures as well. So for instance, what we can do is in this view here, we can click on Star Lore. And I'm going to just try to bring this off to the side just a little bit so we can check out this shape, these two shapes of the Big and Little Dipper, and see what other names there are and stories associated with it. So for instance, we have Arabic astronomy. We can see that it is called the Greater Bear and the Lesser Bear. And we'll see that there's actually very similar names across the board. And so in ancient times, as people were traveling and trading information, they would trade star charts and people would copy them and translate them. And so there's a lot of overlap in the stars that we see. And a lot of the Greek names were translated into Arabic. And then the Arabic translations of those Greek names are what we end up having for a lot of the stars' proper names today. And so we'll see that as we go through. But there's also some differences as well that you might see. For instance, right here, if we take the handle of the Big Dipper and we draw a line through it, we make this arc shape, and we arc to the star Arcturus, which is in the IAU constellation of Bootes the herdsman. In some versions of his story, he takes care of the two bears that we just saw. You can see in Arabic stories, or in Arabic astronomy, it's known as the howler, and this star in particular is the spear thrower. So there's a different way of interpreting that night sky. We can move on. Let's take a look at Inuit astronomy. So in Inuit astronomy, this is seen as the caribou, and the caribou is a very important animal to the Inuit. And so you see that come up in the very important star or set of constellations that's important for navigation. We see that it's called something very important to the Inuit as the caribou. If we move on, you can see there's about 28 or so different star lores or different cultures built into Stellarium, and you can go and check these all out on your own. I wanted to focus on those that had stories that go along with them. Not all of them. Sometimes the stories have been lost or they've been passed on more through oral traditions, and they might not have been recorded or written down. So there's a lot of reasons why we might not always have stories. In some cases, the story should only be told under certain conditions, and this is not one of those conditions. So here we go. We have within Macedonian astronomy, this was known as the group of thieves or the organized group of thieves. Remember how the Big Dipper circles around the North Star. It's this circumpolar constellation up every night. So this is called the group of thieves because it represented thieves that might circle a house that they wanted to go in and steal things from. So there's an interesting story attached to that. Let's head over to Mongolian constellations. In Mongolian astronomy, this is known as the seven Buddhas. So these seven stars are the seven Buddhas. And in the stories, this was actually 8 orphans. And they were called on by the king to go rescue their queen who had been captured. And he said whoever brought her back first would get a golden arrow. Well, the 8 orphans all worked together in order to go and save their queen, and they brought her back. And so rather than taking the arrow and breaking it up into 8 pieces, the king threw the golden arrow into the sky, and whoever got to it first got to keep it. And so the youngest of the orphans, the youngest brother, he grabbed it and became Polaris, while the 7 other orphans became the 7 gods or the 7 Buddhas that we see here. The Ojibwe people are indigenous people here in the Great Lakes region. They are part of the Anishinaabe people that their territory covers the entire Great Lakes region. And so their constellations and stories are seen here. This is all art done in the Ojibwe style by Annette Lee, who is an Ojibwe and Lakota astronomer based out of Minnesota. And she's been working on preserving Ojibwe and Lakota star lore for a while, and you can see within Stellarium, if you go down, it gives you the names here, but you can also find links to her map and her Native Skywatchers program where a lot of this information is coming from. And so here, this shape here has similar stars to Ursa Major, and this is known as the Fisher. And the Fisher is a weasel-like animal who rescued the winged ones from ogres. And so the ogres, out of anger, pinned him to the sky. So you see that here. But the birds, or the winged ones, look for him in the sky because in the fall and winter time he's low, and that's a sign to migrate south. By the spring and summer, the Fisher is high in the sky over here, and that's the time to head back south or back north. So again, you see these observations about nature, about the world, about the sky built into the stories. Similarly, there's the loon here, which is attached to Polaris, which is a star that does not move. And the loon is an animal that doesn't do well outside of the water, so it also stays put in the water. And so if you want to learn more, you can definitely do that. But you see these stories and those observations again built in. We can go to the Sami people. The North Uldra in Frozen 2 were based off of the Sami, who are indigenous people in Northern Europe, in sort of Finland, Russia, Sweden, and Norway. And so here we see that this is a different way of interpreting these 7 stars, and this is Fafna's bow and arrow. And Fafna is over here, which is that star Arcturus again. And this is the sky support. Polaris is the sky support. And so in the Sami stories here is Fafna is someone who must use his bow and arrow to shoot the elk. So here's the elk, but he has to be careful because if he accidentally hits the sky support, the whole world will come crashing down. So that's built in again to the observations that we see here. And finally, let's go back to the Aztec. So this is known as the twisted foot, and this is, we can look down here, there's a lot more information on the twisted foot, as well as different names for different constellations in the sky. But this was represented a twisted foot that had boils and sores, and this represents a god who had sacrificed himself in order to become the sun god instead. So we see that here. So these are just some interpretations and ways of looking at the night sky. And again, every culture has their own way of doing that in ways that are important, but they all represent indigenous knowledge and science from all over the world. All right, so let's go back in and look at some more constellations and sets. So we're going to go back here. There we go. And I need to go change one setting. Give me one moment. Okay. So once we find this Big Dipper shape and follow it to the North Star and go again about the same distance, we find this W shape here. And in Greek mythology, this is the Queen Cassiopeia, and she is the Queen of Ethiopia. Hold on, my setting did not take. There we go. So this W shape is Cassiopeia, and if we turn on her picture, we see that she's sitting in her throne and she's looking at her face right here in a mirror. And she liked to boast how she was more beautiful than everyone, and she and her daughter were the most beautiful people in the world. And this upset the sea nymphs, and so they went to their father, the sea god Poseidon, and said, "You must punish her for her vanity." And so he did, and he started sending crashing waves to her town. And in order, she needed to stop it. She needed to save her town. And so her husband, who is the King Cepheus, he's found here. So here's our Little Dipper. Here's our Big Dipper. And right here, there's this little house shape. This marks the King Cepheus. And they went to an oracle and asked, what can we do to make this stop? And they were told that they needed to sacrifice their daughter Andromeda to Cetus the sea monster. And she is found in the sky near them as well. So if you find this pointier part of Cassiopeia and follow it, you find this long, slender A shape here. And so this is Andromeda, and she's chained to a rock in the middle of the ocean in order to be sacrificed to the sea monster. And so she cried out for help, and the hero Perseus heard her cries. And so he's found here at her feet. Now, he's not fully risen. Once we get into the fall, we will see Perseus a bit more clearly. But he was on his way back from defeating Medusa. And so here's Perseus holding the head of Medusa, and he was not alone. On that adventure, he had met Pegasus the flying horse, and that became his steed. And so Andromeda's head right here, this star, shares a star with this square constellation. Let's turn over here. We can see that square a little better. And this is the Great Square of Pegasus. This is Pegasus the flying horse, which is one of our fall constellations. And if nope, I don't want that. All right. This is Aquarius. We're not going to talk too much about Aquarius today, but this is Pegasus right here, and they rescued Andromeda. And they became married. They fell in love and got married, and then they still needed to punish Cassiopeia for her vanity. So she was placed in the sky, and as she goes around the North Star, she's upside down for half of her path. So that's the ultimate story here, and this is a fall constellation that happens. Now, while we're here, I want to point out a couple of things. First, right here, if you look right there by Andromeda, this point right here points more or less right at it. There's a little smudge. And this isn't just a smudge on your computer screen or a smudge in the projection that we have here, but this is the Andromeda Galaxy. Now, every star we see without a telescope is part of our Milky Way, the galaxy we live in, with the exception of three things. They all look kind of smudgy and cloudy. Two of them are only seen in the southern hemisphere, the small and large Magellanic Clouds, but we also have the Andromeda Galaxy we can see in the northern hemisphere. And here it is up close. Now, you won't be able to see this through a telescope if you have one, because this is a much longer exposure, but this is a very beautiful picture of it. It has these beautiful dust lanes. You can see it's a nice flat disk. This is roughly what we think our Milky Way would look like from someone who was living in the galaxy Andromeda. It's 2.5 million light years away from us, and it's still the closest large galaxy to us. And it's actually on a collision course with the Milky Way. And in about 5 billion years or so, our two galaxies will collide. Individual stars won't actually hit one another because space is mostly made out of space, but all the orbits will change and they'll merge into one larger galaxy. The other thing I want to show you is down here we have the Perseid meteor shower. And so we have little pockets of debris left over from comets that cross our orbit that we pick up that debris every year at the same time of year as we pass that point in our orbit. And it always looks like they're coming from a particular constellation. And so we have some that are called the Perseids, who will come out of the constellation Perseus. So I wanted to point that out as well. All right, so let's head towards the south and look here. All right. Oh, before we do, I want to show you one more thing. All right, so there is a constellation that we can find that starts sort of in between the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, goes around the bowl of the Little Dipper, comes up to here, and has this little circle. This is the constellation Draco. So, if you are a Harry Potter fan, you will find a lot of the witch and wizard names in Harry Potter come from constellations or stars. So Draco, as in Draco Malfoy. I'm pretty sure there's someone named Cassiopeia or Cassiopeia. Andromeda, Andromeda Tonks. That's her name and where it comes from. So I'm going to point those out as we go along, but there's quite a few of them. But let's head now to the south. We're going to have first this beautiful view of Jupiter and Saturn up in the sky right now. Keep an eye on them throughout the rest of the year. When we get to December, you're going to see that they are right next to each other, and we call that a conjunction. So we'll take a look at that in a little bit. Here's Arcturus again in the constellation of Bootes the herdsman. So there's our art there. He took care of our bears. Now here we have a few constellations. Right here in particular, I want to show you one, this little curlicue. And we have the bright star Antares. Antares, by the way, up here, it translates to not Mars or rival of Mars. It's a similar brightness and a similar color and a similar location. Mars will pass by here. So this one is not Mars. And Mars is Mars. So just keep those two separate, I guess, in your mind. But here we have Scorpius the Scorpion. And this is in the Greek stories. And we're going to come back to the Scorpion because his story relates to the winter constellation Orion. And we're going to head to the winter sky in just a moment. A few other things just to show you real quick. We do have Sagittarius the Archer, which is marked by this teapot right here. And then we have 3 bright stars that come up in the summer that form a triangle. So guess what we call it? The summer triangle. We have Vega in the constellation Lyra the Harp. We have Deneb in the constellation Cygnus. So Cygnus is either Greek or Latin. I don't remember which one right now. But Deneb comes from the Arabic word for tail. So remember how we talked about Arabic translations became the star names. And so we see that here in the star Deneb. This is the star Alberio, same thing. And then we also have the star Altair in the constellation Aquila the Eagle. Now, Aquila was sent by the god Zeus to grab Ganymede. He was a young boy that Zeus had fallen in love with. And so he sent Aquila the Eagle to grab Ganymede and bring him back to be the cupbearer of the gods. And Aquarius, right down here, is a representation of Ganymede. And here he is holding the cup right here. And so Aquarius is a bit fainter and harder to see. Some depictions of Aquila show him carrying Ganymede, but you can also see him nearby in the constellation Aquarius. All right, so those are some of the myths and legends. One more thing in the summertime, right next to the summer triangle, there is this sort of wastebasket shape. We call it the keystone, and this marks Hercules. Now, the stories related to Hercules are very many, and so I would encourage you to go read those, but I wanted to show you where Hercules was in the sky. But let's head now to the winter time. And let's do that by skipping ahead. Whoops, that is not what I wanted to do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the art. And let's watch Jupiter and Saturn as we move to the winter. We're going to just skip ahead one day at a time, looking south. As we do that, we're going to see the moon come up in late August at around 10 o'clock at night, right here in the south. And another name for moon is Luna. So Luna Lovegood is named after the moon. And actually, just before we do that, one more thing to show you that's related to Harry Potter, if I can find it. Now, it's a little hard to see, but if you look underneath the scorpion, there is this small little triangle of stars. And that marks the head of Lupus the wolf. And if you think about Remus Lupin in Harry Potter, his name derives from the word lupus, which is Latin for wolf, also tied to the constellation here. And spoiler alert, what does Remus Lupin turn into? He is a werewolf. So not only are the stars' names and the wizard and witch names borrowed from the stars, they usually have some meaning tied to them as well. All right, so let's watch Jupiter and Saturn. As we go into the fall, you might see them starting to get a little bit closer. And then by early November, they're setting around 9 o'clock. So let's go back a little bit in time because it's actually dark earlier in the evening in the winter time. And here's Mars over here in the east. We have a lovely picture of Mars. And then as we go through, watch how Jupiter and Saturn get closer and closer and closer. And eventually, on the 19th, we see them get right on top of each other, and they stay that way for a while, and they're actually at their closest around here on the 20th. They're going to be so close that you'll be able to see them at the same time through a telescope. During most conjunctions, that doesn't always happen, but this time it will. So this is how close they're going to get in the sky. And so as the planets go around the sun, they go at different speeds. And so sometimes we'll get to a point where we line up, or they appear to line up from our perspective. And so that's what's happening in December. But because of that, you see that in the names of the planets. Not necessarily the names of them. They're often associated with gods in a lot of different cultures. But the name planet or the word planet comes from things like wandering stars, or it's the restless ones, because they're always moving amongst the stars. Will the stars keep their place relative to one another throughout the year? All right, so there's Jupiter and Saturn. And now that we're here, let's look towards the south and go a bit later in the wintertime and look at some of these winter constellations. Probably the most famous one that we know of is Betelgeuse here. Not Betelgeuse, Orion with the stars Betelgeuse. Here's the star Bellatrix, right here, his other shoulder, so Bellatrix Lestrange, Saiph, and Rigel. And then here we have his belt, so 1, 2, 3. And this highest star, that's the name of a satellite. It's not an actual UFO, by the way. This last star, I can't seem to click on it, but that's called Mintaka. And so I know the theme is myths and legends and fantasy, but in science fiction, there's an episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, where they go to a planet called Mintaka 3. And there's Mintaka. I just wanted to point that out. So here we have the constellation of Orion the Hunter. In Ojibwe constellations, it's very similar. This is the body right here, but his arm reaches out to this star and out to this star over here, and he's known as the Winter Maker. And so it's a timekeeping constellation to know when winter is coming and when to get ready for the cold. All right, so we're going to click on Rigel down here. So here's Orion. Now, I told you I'd tell you the story of Orion. Now, Orion was a very, very good hunter, and he was very boastful of how good of a hunter he was. And so he went, and so because of that, a king of an island invited him down to try to kill some of the beasts that were wreaking havoc on their island. And there he met Merope. And Orion pursued Merope to the point where he attacked her. And her father was so upset by this that he blinded Orion. And so Orion left the island looking for someone who could restore his sight. And he did get his sight restored, and along the way he met the goddess Artemis. And Artemis fell in love with her, or with Orion. But her brother was very worried about this because he had attacked Merope. And so he decided to kill Orion. And one version of the story, a scorpion is sent to sting Orion and kill him. And so that scorpion is the scorpion that we see in the summertime. Now, Artemis was very upset by Orion's death and asked that he be made immortal or honored in some way. So it was agreed that he would be placed in the sky in the winter, and the scorpion that killed him was placed in the other part of the sky in the opposite time of year so that they're never in the sky together. So again, this is a story that's representing these observations of the stars that we have in the sky. So here is Orion the hunter. Now if we go just a tad later into the night, there's also a constellation called Monoceros. It is a unicorn, so it's one horn, like rhinoceros, which is nose horn, one horn for Monoceros, the unicorn. I'm going to go ahead and clear the sky. There we go. And go back to just Orion here. So Orion is a hunter, so he has two hunting dogs. One, his belt right here points downwards to the star Sirius, and Sirius, just like Sirius Black, is the brightest star in the night sky. And if we click on Sirius, we see that Sirius is part of Canis Major, the large dog. And what does Sirius Black turn into? Spoiler alert, a dog. So again, we see that here. Now, if we have a big dog, or Canis Major, we also have Canis Minor, or little dog. So take Betelgeuse, go down to Sirius, and then make this bright triangle here we call the winter triangle to find Procyon. And Procyon is part of Canis Minor, the little dog. It is literally two whole stars. So we call it the hot dog. Ha ha. Such a good joke. All right. So another thing about Sirius. Sirius is a very bright star. We see it primarily in the nighttime in the winter. But we can see it peak up just above the horizon right before the sun does in the east in the summertime, particularly in August, when it's usually the hottest time of the year. And so Sirius is associated with the big dog, and so this is called the dog star. And so some people believe that since Sirius is the brightest star, and at that time of year it was close to the sun, they were adding their heat together, and that's why it got so hot. We know now Sirius is too far away from us to ever affect our heat, but that's where the phrase dog days of summer comes from, is because of Sirius, the dog star, being near the sun at that time. All right. So some other things that we might want to look for up in the sky is we can follow the belt of Orion upwards and we find Aldebaran. Aldebaran comes from the Arabic for the follower, or the Pleiades follower, because it appears to follow this star here, which is called the Pleiades. In Greek mythology, the Pleiades were seven sisters were seven sisters that Orion was pursuing, and so their father was the god Atlas. So Zeus placed them into the sky. He turned them into doves, and then they flew into the sky to get away from Orion, but it still looks like he is pursuing them. And there's a lot of different stories about the Pleiades that involve the number 7. So, for instance, the Cherokees see this as 7 boys who wouldn't do their chores. And so they were trying to run away and get away. And so 6 of them jumped up into the sky. But the 7th brother was caught by his mother, and he fell to the sky with such force that he went right into the ground, and a pine tree grew there. And this story explains why there's only 6 stars, even though the number 7 is associated with it. And we see this a lot. There's actually only about 6 stars most people can see naked eye, but we also see throughout different cultures that there's some explanation for why there's always the number 7, but we only see 6 of them. The Menachie people see this as 7 wives who liked onions more than their husbands, and so they went away into the sky to get away because of their love of onions. The Nez Perce see this as 7 sisters, and one of the sisters fell in love with a human. And when he died, she was so upset by this, but her sisters made fun of her for being upset about a human. And so, out of her shame, she put a veil over her face. And so, we don't see her anymore. So, again, it's the number 7, but it explains why we only see 6. In Thailand, this is known as the chick stars. And there's a couple different versions, but overall, there's an elderly couple who took care of a mother hen and her 6 chicks, or in some versions, her 7 chicks. And a monk came through and they wanted to feed him something, but they didn't have any food. And so they decided to feed him the mother hen. And so the mother hen heard this and went and said goodbye to her chicks and said, "Be good to the elderly couple because they have been taking care of us." And then as she was being roasted over the fire, the chicks jumped into the fire in order to be with their mother. And so the gods saw this and thought that that was such a great show of love that they placed the mother hen and her chicks up in the sky. So there's a lot of different stories associated with the Pleiades. This is a lovely group of stars that we see in the wintertime, and there's many different stories associated with it, and those are just a few. For instance, in Aztec astronomy, this is also known as the market or the marketplace because that's where people gather and we see a large group of stars all together. All right, let's go back to see what else there is. The star here in Taurus shares a star with this constellation here called Auriga. And Auriga has a star Capella, and these 3 stars underneath called the kids. So this is the mother goat star and her 3 kids. But in Greek mythology and Roman mythology, Auriga is also the charioteer or the chariot driver. So why is he holding a goat? Well, we think that this was its own constellation of Auriga, and this was its own constellation of the mother goat and her kids. Some versions put this as Almathea, who was the goat that suckled Zeus when he was a baby. But over time, we think that they kind of got merged together into one constellation. So that's why it's a chariot driver holding a goat. All right, and then finally, we go back to here. We take this star Rigel up to Betelgeuse, which comes from the Arabic for arm or armpit of the giant, and then up here to Castor and Pollux. And this shows the constellation of the twins of Gemini. Now, the twins of Gemini were 2 brothers. They were born from the same mother at the same time, but one had a mortal father and one had an immortal father. His father was Zeus. And they were very close, and they went on adventures together all the time. And on one of these adventures, the mortal twin died. And his brother was so upset by this, he went to the gods and said, "Can you please make my brother immortal so we don't ever have to be apart?" And the gods made a compromise and said, "We will place you both in the sky together." And as they go across the sky, they're in the heavens for half of the year, and they're in the underworld for the other half when we don't see Gemini. So the underworld is where the human brother's soul was supposed to be, and the mortal brother was supposed to be in the heavens. So they split their time between where each one is supposed to be. All right. Let's see. Gemini in Aztec astronomy, let's go check our star lore, is seen as something different. So there's a ball game that was very important to the Aztecs. And Gemini marks the court of the ball game. So this is known as the ball game of the stars here. And then the balls that move would be the sun and the moon. If we go back to Orion here and look at Mayan astronomy, Orion is actually very important because here the 3 stars that mark that belt is known as the turtle. And the turtle was there at the time of creation in Mayan stories. And at the time of creation, a primordial fire was also started, which we see marks from this star down in this triangle. And the smoke from the fire is marked by the Orion Nebula. So the middle star here, if we look in, it looks like a fuzzy blob. And if you look through a telescope, we see this is the Orion Nebula. So this is right where brand new stars are forming. And that is incorporated into the Mayan constellation of the primordial fire. All right. So let's finish up here. All right, while we have these last few, I want to show you, here is Cetus the whale, by the way, the sea monster. Right over here with Pegasus. Here's Pegasus across the sky in the wintertime over in the west. But here we can see the constellation Pisces. It sort of hugs the corner here. In Greek mythology, the monster Typhon, or the Titan Typhon, went to attack the gods who were picnicking by a river. And so the gods decided to change themselves in order to get away. So this was Aphrodite and her son Eros. And so they changed themselves into fish, jumped into the water to get away from Typhon. But to make sure they wouldn't lose each other, they tied their tails together. So we see that ribbon here. And if we go back to our sky of tonight in August, we see a story related to that. There we go. Right here next to Sagittarius and Aquarius, we have Capricornus, which is seen as a sea goat. What is a sea goat, you ask? Well, the god Pan, he was part goat. He also wanted to jump into the water to get away from Typhon, so he turned himself into a fish. But in his panic, he only managed to turn his back half into a fish. So that is why Capricornus is a sea goat. So there you go. So let's turn ourselves back around to the north. And let's turn all of these constellations off. And remind ourselves that when we look up at the night sky, we all share the same stars. And it's a chance to bring everyone together, especially right now when we're all home and quarantined and not able to go out as much. We can all look up and find comfort, perhaps, in knowing that other people are looking at the same stars that we are. And that is something that can still connect us from afar. But it's also an opportunity for us to learn from one another, how people interpret different things, what's important to them, how they use the stars to navigate and tell time. These are all different ways that we can use the stars. And the stories associated with the stars are always more than a story. They are tied to things that are important. They're tied to scientific observations that were being passed down to others and continue to be passed down in this way. So go outside, look up, use your imagination, and see what stories you can tell with the stars. All right, I'll see you guys later, and you have a great rest of your day.